how you doing today?
Hey, Lizzie, I am good. Surgery is finished.
You finished your surgery. That's awesome.
Yeah. So now I just have these like special exercises to do, like every hour to like stretch and stuff, get my muscle back. So it's good.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds intense, but at least you're on the right track with your ACL injury and you're ready to roll. And hopefully by the end of the summer, you'll be out there running again and just rocking it as usual, right?
I decided my new goal now is triathlon.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, that's my new goal.
So ambitious. I love it. Triathlon. That's fantastic. You should definitely do that.
I know.
You should do it. I wonder if any of our listeners have done a triathlon before. I'm sure they have.
Please let us know, especially guys, listeners, if you have done any like triathlon training apps or something like cool, online resources for training, let us know. That'd be awesome.
Let us know. Absolutely. I love it. So Jessica, today, this week we got a question from one of our listeners, and our listener was telling me that her biggest fear for the IELTS exam is that she's worried that she's going to get into the speaking test and she's not going to understand the question that the examiner gives her. And I totally understand that fear, right?
Totally. That's really scary. I mean, I think the short test is reassuring. Like you only have to talk for 14 minutes. 11 to 14 minutes. But at the same time, it's like, I only have a couple questions to choose from. Like, what if I don't understand them? So, we have good news. We have good news for you today, because you can ask the examiner what the words mean. If you don't understand.
That's the first thing we can do. We can actually ask. Okay, so that's good to know. I wouldn't have known that. So we can actually ask the examiner what specific words mean. Is that the first thing you would do if you didn't understand the question?
Yeah, exactly. So I am thinking about this divided by parts because there are different rules for each part, right, of the speaking test. So in part 1, if you don't understand the question, it's most likely because of one word, because they're simple questions, but they're short questions. So for example, if the examiner says, what do you want your future position to be at work? Maybe you're like, position, what? Like you understand all the other words. So just ask specifically, what does position mean? But still, try and be polite. Like, sorry, what does position mean, please?
Right. Or sorry, I didn't understand the word position. Can you explain it? Okay, that's great. Well, I'm glad to know that we actually can do that, because a lot of listeners might think that we can't actually ask that question to the examiner, and then they would just start to spiral downward and we would be in a lot of trouble in that case.
Exactly. And then they would just like pause and have silence, and that's the worst, right? And the whole test is over. So in part 1, technically the examiners are not supposed to explain the questions because they're supposed to be more simple, right? But most examiners, guys, if you ask them what a specific word means, will tell you because they want to hear you speak, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's another good opportunity when we don't understand something. It's a chance to show our fluency, right? A chance to use some kind of idiom, even if we can, or some kind of show your flexibility with the language.
So that's why I came up with specific phrases to use in each part. So like Lindsay and I said, in part 1, you could say, sorry, what does position mean? Or what does this word mean? Or what was the one you said? Sorry, can you?
I didn't understand that. Could you explain it better? Right?
Exactly.
Could you please explain that?
Yeah, I didn't understand the word position. Can you explain that? Yeah, that's perfect.
Exactly.
So luckily in part 2 and part 3, the examiner does have a little more flexibility. So in part 2, if you get a topic, the one thing you can't do is ask for a different topic.
Okay, yeah, and we've mentioned that in an episode before, guys. You cannot ask, the examiner can't just take the topic and throw it out the window. That was a bad question.
I know,
right?
I know. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to give you that one. Sorry. Like, the examiner's not going to say they're wrong, right?
Clearly, no. Come on.
So instead of saying that, because that might frustrate the examiner because she or he is not able to do that. So don't ask to change the topic. Instead, just find the reason. What don't you understand exactly? Hopefully it's just a vocabulary word you don't understand. And then you could say, same phrases as part 1, or you could say, Can you explain this word, please? Or can you give an example of this word, please?
Oh, can you give an example of this word? I like that. I like that. So it's a little bit different than explaining. Whoops.
My crutches just fell off the chair.
That's all right. We have an injury in the house, an injured person in the house.
Luckily, my crutches didn't land on me, creating another injury.
I know. Oh, God, that would be terrible. Can you imagine? I'm sure our listeners can understand. I mean, everybody's been injured before, right? It's a scary thing.
Yeah.
Sometimes we lose our minds. It's normal.
So excuse me, guys. Okay, so if you ask for an example, I think that's a very efficient, a very smart way to understand the question, because examples, like we talk about in your speaking and writing answers, giving examples is the clearest way to be understood, right? So same vice versa. If you don't understand something, you can ask the examiner for an example, and she or he will, they have to explain it to you.
They have to explain it in part 2. But again, in part 1, they don't necessarily have to, but they often will.
It's
right?
a gray area.
It's a gray area. Okay, so there's a little room, a little wiggle room there, right? Yeah. Wiggle room. I like that expression.
Ooh, that's
wiggle
good.
room.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Ooh, that's wiggle room. It makes me want to dance. So
wiggle.
So if you picture the action of wiggling, that's kind of shaking your bum or shaking your body back and forth, right? So if you ask for some wiggle room, it's like you want some flexibility. You want some space, some more options.
Flexibility.
Yeah.
That's it. I like that. Good one to use on the speaking test if you have a chance, because it's very native-like. Okay.
Yeah, totally.
Cool. And so that's what we can do for speaking part 2, right? Ask again what the word means, or ask for an example. Anything else we can do in speaking part 2 if we don't understand the question?
No, I think those are your only 2 options. So, So far, part 1, just ask what the word means, because that's most likely the problem. And part 2, you can ask what a specific word means, or you can ask for an example. This is a bit broad, but if you really don't understand the question as a whole, it's not, like the problem of one word, then you could say, I apologize, I'm not familiar with this topic. Can you explain, please?
Okay. So in that case, you're asking for an explanation of the entire question, not just a term or a word.
Yeah. So the examiners are all teachers, so they're really good at explaining stuff in a clear, short way. So they'll be able to get the idea across to you.
Good. So maybe just don't be afraid, right? Don't be afraid to say it if you don't get it, if you don't understand.
I mean, think about your option. Like, you either don't ask and then you don't say anything because you don't know what to say.
You just sit there, right? Silence.
Yeah, your score's like nothing. Or like, take a chance, ask the examiner for an example or for a definition, and then carry on.
Yeah, I like that. Okay. So that's awesome. And anything else in part 3 that we would want to do, or that's pretty much it?
Yeah. So part 3, same methods, so ask for what the word means, a definition, ask for an example, or if you really don't understand what the examiner is talking about, you could say, I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with this topic. I did think of a couple more phrases for part 3, since part 3 is more formal, right? So you want to use different vocabulary. You could say, can you clarify, please?
Oh, I like it. To clarify. It's a little bit more of an academic phrase, and we want to be speaking in academic terms in speaking part 3, right, Jessica?
Exactly.
Oh, okay.
So also you can just be very frank and honest. We've talked about how Western communication, and therefore examiners and the IELTS grades, they value you being direct, right? Like being very
directness
clear.
Is really cool. Yes.
So that's why you can also say, I've honestly never heard of this topic. Can you give me an example? Just be honest. And again, like, if you are saying that, good fluency, good vocabulary, perfect sentence structure, and you're also letting yourself be more relaxed because you're like, like, I'm being honest here. And then the examiner can feel that, it's okay. I understand.
It's good to be relaxed. Yeah, because if you're nervous, you make the other person nervous, and it becomes this difficult situation where everything is very intense, right? So you just relax a little bit, right?
I think an examiner nightmare is in the very beginning of part 1, if a student just like falls apart just like right away, and just really cannot get their ideas across at all. Maybe because they're so nervous, or really because they don't have enough English. And so the examiner is just like, I have 14 more minutes to talk to this person.
No, it's so painful for the examiner too, not just for the student, right? So anything that you guys can do to kind of reduce that pressure, right? Anything you can do. And to me, it's always communicating, right? Anytime you communicate that you're feeling anxious or feeling nervous, it really just kind of pokes a hole in that balloon and everything starts to kind of relax.
Yeah, and it's amazing how quickly the deflation can happen. Like how quickly you can relax, Yes. So let me remind you guys of these phrases quickly, okay? So if you're taking notes, you could try and write these down or listen again. So what does this word mean? I'm not familiar with this topic. Can you explain this word, or can you explain this topic, please? Can you give an example, please? And then in part 3, can you clarify, please? Or I've honestly never heard of this topic or this word before. Can you explain? All right. So
I love it. Phrases. Yeah, so if you guys are armed with the right phrases that you've just learned from Jessica today, you'll be going into that test and you'll be ready. And again, I guess the last thing that I would suggest is just smile, right? Yeah. We've talked about this before. We've talked about this a whole bunch. We probably will more in the future. But just smiling and letting the energy kind of just get out there. Just be honest, smile, and try to relax and use those phrases, and you'll be okay. You guys are ready for this, right?
Exactly, guys.
They're ready.
I think, yeah. I mean, the most important takeaway is that it's okay to ask. That's the most important thing to take away from this, guys, so you don't have that nervous energy and that pause and your silence, So the most important thing is just relax, guys. You can ask. Practice these phrases that we've given you. There are some example questions online you could use. One website is goodluckielts.com. They have some example questions up there. So check that out and practice these phrases.
Awesome. And just, again, knowing what the examiner wants is also really convenient when you walk into that speaking test. So, guys, you are ready. And thanks for this information today, Jessica. This has been really good. And it's good to know that we're able to ask.
Yeah, that's the most important thing. Poor student. That would be so scary, like thinking that you can't ask. So, yeah, thanks for that question. That was a really good topic.
All right. Awesome. Let's wrap it up for today. Take care. Thanks for hanging out, Jessica.
Thanks, Lindsay. Bye.
Bye.